All right, let's get a reaction to what happened in court today. Criminal law expert William Booth joins us. William, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. So let's start with this recusal that Jacob Zuma wants to happen. Of course, arguing that Billy Downer is biased because he actually stood with the DA in an attempt to get him back in this case and back on trial. Is that a relative argument? Will we see him removed?
Well, the pleas in terms of Section 106 of the Criminal Procedure Act, and one of the subsections of that section says that an accused can plea that the prosecutor doesn't have title. In other words, he's asking for the prosecutor to recuse himself. But what must happen is the court has to look at this, I believe, objectively. In other words, whether any other person in that same position would regard that he is not going to get a fair trial. What surprised me a bit is why was this aspect not raised previously? My view is that you can raise it before plea. So if you've got a problem with a particular prosecutor, surely you raise that timelessly and not at the plea stage. Because what could happen if the judge finds that there are grounds for Mr. Downer to remove himself from the case, that is not the end of the case. It will obviously still continue. And another prosecutor may have to step in and to continue with the prosecution. So, one has to look at the rationale behind lodging a plea along these grounds. And if you wanted to get rid of a prosecutor, surely it's something that you raise right in the beginning. I mean, Downer has been involved in this case right from the onset in the days when Sheikh was prosecuted.
But isn't it part of delaying tactics then? Because that's the strategy here. We've seen Jacob Zuma say constantly he wants to have his day in court, but whenever he gets to court, he's throwing a spanner in the works, and this is the recent spanner that he's thrown in. So will a judge still consider this at such a late stage then?
Well, look, obviously the judge must consider it, because the state can now reply to what has been said by Zuma or Zuma's counsel. And obviously, Mr. Downer would then get somebody else standing in for him to argue the matter, because essentially he may be a witness in this whole application. So the judge has to consider it. It's a question of whether there are any grounds on which to bring such an application, other than really just, as you say, this is a whole situation of just let's delay and delay. Because if you've got to look at what he said in the papers, the case has gone to various other courts, and those courts have said that Zuma must be prosecuted. And that is what Downer is saying, that he should be prosecuted. So, to argue, well, his decision to be involved in the prosecution is unfair and therefore impacts on Zuma's rights to a fair trial is, my view, rather misplaced.
And of course, the NPA is still insisting, even after what we heard today in court, that it does have a watertight case because it has the relevant evidence to show the links between French arms company Thales, Shabir Sheikh, and then, of course, Jacob Zuma. So, as you say, this trial will still go on because the other argument from Jacob Zuma was that he could ask for an overall acquittal in this trial. What's the possibility of that happening?
Well, an overall acquittal, obviously, at the end of all the evidence. But as I said earlier, even if the court finds in his favor, and, this is not a point that is often taken. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of case law on this particular point. There's quite a bit of case law where people ask for a presiding officer to step down from the case and obviously can submit grounds on which that might be unfair to have a certain judge dealing with the matter. But it's highly unusual where there's an application in respect of a prosecutor, unless there are good reasons. In other words, a prosecutor has clearly interfered with witnesses, he has spoken to witnesses and he has changed their evidence, he's intimidated witnesses, along those lines. I mean, but that's not the situation here. So if this application, even if it is granted, my view is the trial will then carry on with another prosecutor. He's not asking that the whole prosecuting authority be disbarred from prosecuting him. In other words, no prosecutor can ever continue with his case. I mean, that kind of argument is quite honestly, ridiculous with respect. So if evidence is presented and that evidence is challenged, which is his good right, cross-examined, he's allowed to give evidence, he's allowed to call witnesses, and if he feels at the end of the whole case he's going to be acquitted, well, so be it. That time will only tell as to whether there's sufficient evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to convict Mr. Zuma on any of these charges.